All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today's presentation is Early Warning Signs and Suicide Prevention Best Practice in Children and Youth. Today's session is being, it is a Great Lakes ROTA-RC presentation, and it is being hosted by Great Lakes ROTA-RC's regional partner, UW-Madison Division of Extension. So I just want to take a moment to thank them for sponsoring our speak today. I'll be your host. My name is Emily. I'm the Regional Project Manager. But before we get into our presentation, we have a few quick housekeeping items that I just want to go through. The first is to make mention of our funder and funding activity. The Great Lakes ROTA-RC is funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. We are a Region 5, which covers Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. As part of the project activities, we provide virtual and/or on-demand education, evidence-based resources and research, as well as technical outreach to professionals working in and with rural communities. So if you're interested more about the project activities, please reach out through our products and through our website. We'll be providing that throughout our presentation at the end, and it is up there on the website. The website is up there on the slide as well if you're interested in that. A little quick view of our website, which is currently getting some modifications and updates. So I would strongly encourage you to go check it out. It's getting some modifications. This is our resource library. We are building some direct access to some of the tools that we put there. We'd like you to go and check it out. But if you're looking for information on some of our partners, the TTCs, the ORNs, SAMHSA, as well as just some rural health resources, community toolkits, videos, podcasts, supportive apps. We're constantly working on building that resource library to be something that can help you. So feel free to go and check that out. It may not even look like that anymore. It may be even more modern, more better. So go check it out. I want to take a moment now to move into our session and prepare ourselves to be ready for our education. So as we listen and engage in the session content, we first want to begin to just take a moment to promote the use of affirming person-first language when discussing behavioral health disorders. And as we think and prepare ourselves, just take a moment to create that environment of learning together. We want to feel welcoming and safe for everyone. And so we want to work together to manage a space that supports that non-stigmatizing, recovery-orientated language that can help reduce negative bias and really promote engagement. As always, we invite you to learn about successful prevention, treatment, and recovery from whatever space you're joining us from today. And we welcome you formally into the Great Lakes ROTA-RC community of learning. I want to invite you now to get to know our presenter for today. Debra Cavitt is an advocate, trainer, and project director for Minnesota Association of Children's Mental Health. Cavitt provides presentations and works on projects with schools, children, youth, parents, and professionals to increase understanding and reduce the stigma-related mental health disorders that she works around and with. As a parent, coach, and advocate, she helps families navigate systems on their journey of raising a child with mental and health challenges. Debra has a master's degree in human services with specializations in mental health and substance use counseling, and a bachelor's degree in education. Before joining MACHM, she worked as a prevention specialist and a grant coordinator for substance abuse treatment agencies in Iowa City. Preceding her mental health and substance use prevention work, she was a teacher for over 20 years, working on the White Earth Indian Reservation in northern Minnesota. I would like to hand the presentation over now to Debra, and I would invite all of you to engage and listen to what she has to say.
Thank you, Amanda. Can you see my screen fine? Excellent. Just wanted to double check. It's a pleasure to be here today As Amanda said, I work for Minnesota Association for Children's Mental Health, and we are an education and advocacy organization that serves the whole state of Minnesota. Today, I'm going to do part one, and then tomorrow I'll have 2 hours on the suicide prevention piece. So I'll delve more into depression and suicide prevention and some of the more serious chronic types of illnesses tomorrow. Today, it'll be more about the developmental differences and some of the types of warning signs you'll see in just the most common of the mental health disorders. And in Minnesota, we have educators a requirement that they have to get CEUs in early warning signs and suicide prevention. So this is also geared a lot towards teachers, although it can help anyone who's ever working with children, parents, community members. Our mission at MACMA is to protect, promote, and pursue optimal mental health from infancy through young adulthood. In the past, MACMA's been around for 30 years, and in the past, our mission stated something that was more on the illness side. Now we like to look at the whole person and look at wellness and have wellness be our goal. So we want to help everybody to be able to thrive. And Amanda already told you about myself. If you go to our website at macma.org, you can see it in my email address there. You can find resources, but you can also call me. And I've helped people from other states besides Minnesota in the past when they have questions or need help finding resources for their family members who are struggling with mental health concerns. All right. As I said, our goal is to help people flourish, to function well. And one thing we like to keep in mind is that mental health is not a word that means mental illness. So if you look at a dual continuum, mental health can be when people are flourishing and feeling their very best, whether or not they have a diagnosis, or when people are struggling and languishing, and that's when we can help people find resources and help prevent things like cutting or suicide or other things that might happen to that person. So this would be our goal with all of any person that we interact with. We would hope this for them. We would want them to be able to interact and trust others and become more self-assured. We'd want them to be able to function and to flourish and find pleasure in daily life. We would hope that they could learn to develop distress tolerance and self-regulation and help them manage overwhelming emotions and express feelings in a healthy, appropriate manner. And if you've worked with young people, you'll know that any one of them at any time could struggle with this. And the way that we build relationships with and interact with young people of any age, whether it's toddlers all the way through teens and young adults, we can help to be role models, but also regulation partners to help them to start to learn those skills and to feel better. When we think about mental health concerns, it can go all the way from something that any one of us could have, because all of us are on the continuum of mental health. And sometimes all of us can get to a point where we feel like we're flourishing, we feel our very best, or where different things can happen in our lives where we may want to seek help for our anxiety or our depression, any one of the number of things that might start to affect us. But there are different factors involved. Biological factors are factors such as brain physiology, could be a disruption in neurochemical transmission. It could be genetics. So in some families, severe persistent mental illness such as bipolar or major depressive episodes can run in the family. Um, and so that's something to be aware of and to know that it's neurological in those cases and there are ways to get help. And it may take some medical treatment as well as therapy. Environmental factors. Environmental factors has to do with trauma. And we always want to have a trauma-informed lens to be aware that it isn't just willful misbehavior, but sometimes trauma that is causing a child to have trouble with managing their emotions. Other things that can happen in the environment, if children have basic needs, a deprivation of their basic needs, that can impact their mental health. Events, so whether it's a tornado or a huge one was the pandemic. Pandemic greatly impacted children throughout the United States and teens and parents. It made an impact in a way that was hard to see coming, and we're still feeling the effects of abuse, whether it's sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, that can have a big impact on a person's mental health. Personality traits. There is no such thing as a depressive personality. That's not what we're referring to here. But personality traits means that some people can go through the same event and not be impacted as much as someone else who maybe is more at risk, more vulnerable, more sensitive. So those are influences. How do you know if a child or a young person is starting to have some real warning signs of mental health problems? First of all, a lot of things that have to do with mood or dysregulation are not a mental illness. It's part of a normal part of being human. We all lose it sometimes. We all can be angry. We all have normal feelings. But if these things begin to disrupt their ability to thrive, you might see some of these symptoms. Person maybe who had been very engaged with their friends in the past goes through a period of time when they avoid their friends and avoid activities and school and social events that they may have arrived in before. That could be a big warning sign. Expected outbursts of anger or crying. And that doesn't mean just anytime any one of us might get angry or cry, but where it becomes impactful enough and often enough so that it gets in the way of their ability to do well in school and to get along with others. Difficulty sleeping, feeling exhausted or irritated. Unable to eat or eating and vomiting. So if somebody has those signs, it could be a sign of an eating disorder. Excessive exercising, and that can fit in with eating disorders such as anorexia. One of the things about anorexia is it includes a lot of obsessive compulsive behavior. And one of those is excessive exercising, which is an effort to purge calories, similar to vomiting, only just trying to burn it all off. Escaping by sleeping or daydreaming all the time. This could be a sign of depression. Severe behavior change or mood swings from depressed to highly energized. This type of mood disorder could be bipolar. So that's something to watch for as well. And excessive use of drugs and alcohol. Sometimes it's that saying, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Oftentimes when people are struggling with a mental health disorder, they may try to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol. And it may give temporary relief, which gets more complicated as the drugs or alcohol start to become an addiction, and then they have both problems to deal with. You might say to yourself, well, how do I know if it's just a phase, just normal for their age? That's a very important thing to think about, is their age. So if toddlers have a meltdown every day or become dysregulated, that's not a sign of a mental health disorder necessarily, unless it's really extreme. It's usually just a part of their normal development. But these are the questions you can ask yourself. But again, compare it to their age group, to their developmental stage, because some things are more common at different stages. Frequency, how often does the child exhibit the symptoms? So if I'm a teacher and teaching, say, fourth graders, and one child's just really having a hard time uh, coming into class and just keeping his moods and emotions under control, and does it quite often, like on a daily basis or many times a day, that's a sign. Duration, how long do they last? So as a teacher, it's very normal for people to get angry. If I'm out on the playground with kids and any one of them could end up angry enough to get in a fight or to be really upset and lash out at someone. That doesn't mean it's a mental health disorder. Duration, though, is when you think of a young person who gets really upset. Perhaps they think something's unfair, but they become so upset that they start to destroy property and they can't seem to calm down. So that would be the duration where it goes on and on and on. Intensity, how severe are the symptoms? So intensity is how much is it getting in the way of even being able to function in the setting that they're in at the time? And intensity could also mean how angry. So it's one thing if I'm angry and I tell you I feel really angry at you, but it's another thing if if I become explosive and try to hurt someone. Functionality. So this is another thing. For example, if you felt maybe they had an eating disorder, think about this. How well are they functioning in life? Is it getting in the way of their daily life? Are they impaired in any way at home, school, or with friends? And as a person who had a family member very close to me when they were age 13 that developed anorexia, this was huge. It it changed completely from the year before. When they were in sixth grade, they were functioning really well, enjoying their friends, having friends over, taking part in things. But when the anorexia started, all those things started to fall away. And it was hard for them to even sit still in class, and they would ask for passes. They felt like they had to be continually moving to burn those calories. So it definitely impaired them functionally. And this is a person who normally got straight A's. And suddenly, when they went through this period of time when they were sick, it was hard to even do schoolwork. Early intervention is very important. I think as a parent, sometimes we just kind of watch and think, well, maybe I'm just imagining this, or maybe this is just a phase. So, but the earlier we can intervene, the less damage it does psychologically and physically to that person. It'll reduce the effect on that child and their families. So if you can think of a child who's going through something like anorexia, and if it keeps lasting for a year, and you've taken them to a therapist and trying to do all the right things, but it seems like they're stuck in this disorder, that can cause their grades to slip, their learning for that year to not take place. And it also can cause things like osteoporosis, or even heart damage. So just the sooner we can get them in there, the better. And I always tell people, whether they're teachers or parents, to trust their instincts. If you are starting to notice a red flag, trust that inner feeling and get some advice about it. Have your child go to a checkup with their pediatrician, and then maybe a referral to somebody who specializes in it, because the sooner that you can get that intervention, the less likelihood it'll do more permanent damage or become very chronic and have to deal with it through a lifetime. So you want to lessen the duration and severity of the disorder. And early intervention, for example, with kids who are having a real hard time with emotion management. It can help them to learn those positive coping strategies and help prevent academic and social failure. So you want to get to the heart of the matter with that person and then help them learn about their own needs and learn coping strategies so they can grow and flourish. Sometimes malnutrition, neglect, living in a very poverty-stricken country or area can cause a child's brain develop to be impacted. This is from Bruce Perry, and he studies child trauma and teaches about it. But these SPEC scans are normal, are of the same age child and at the same scale. So the normal brain, look at how much bigger the circumference of the head is. The child who's had extreme neglect in their life as a toddler and as an infant before that has a much smaller, his head is much smaller in development. It also has larger gaps in the gray matter. So you can see that this child is really going to be impacted by the neglect. This neglect could be trauma-based. It could be toxic stress. It could be injury, infection, illness, malnutrition, definitely. And then abuse, exposure to toxins. All of those things can impact brain development. Here, I put this picture on because I think it shows, the picture itself shows something that's happening here. If you'll notice, this baby is crying and the grandparent is watching it. The grandparent has a dull affect or shows very little feeling, but also you can see every rib bone in the grandparent. The child is very tiny, has very little fat on their arms and legs, which is a sign of malnourishment at that age. And the fact that it's crying inconsolably shows that there's a need there, a great need. Oftentimes, when there's a country that might be going through starvation of its people, where both parents maybe are working every second to try to do things and get things for their family, but it's just they're going through that time in their country. That's the type of thing that can happen. And it can happen in America, with groceries going way up and people not being able to even afford a place to live. You can see children that are going through that type of thing. The problem is that is the most rapid time of brain development, and it literally will damage the neural pathways that are developing in the child's brain. So that's why things like WIC and Head Start, especially having meals at school, school lunch programs. All of those are very important to help children that may not have that when they're in their own home. I've had parents in our parent leadership groups that have talked about children their children that they've raised that were adopted. Especially there were some people that had adopted children from Russia and other former Soviet Union countries where the child seemed to not flourish the way they had thought they would. And it could be reactive attachment disorder. What happens is if a child is raised, for example, as one parent put it, in an orphanage where there may be 100 children to 1 or 2 adults from the time they're little. When they got their child, there were bed spring bruises and lots of lice and other things, flea bites, and just a lack of care because of the orphanage setting in that other country. The parents, gave them a very rich life and a and were very loving with them, but there was something there that just seemed to linger. And what it is the brain development before they were adopted had to do with not having attachment with a significant loving caregiver that really focused on them. Children, when they're little, learn to communicate by crying and being picked up, by getting wet and letting people know, crying again. If they're hungry, they cry. If their tummy hurts and they want to be walked through the hallways and sang to and rocked, all of that helps to soothe that developing child. For a child that doesn't have a significant caregiver and somebody to soothe them when they're little, there are a lot of things that happen in the brain to survive. And if there's abuse of any type, that too can cause the neural pathways develop in a way that has to do with survival rather than attachment. So the symptoms and severity can vary. It can cause some children to become destructive and self-injurious, to harm others. They may not feel guilt and remorse as another child does. There may be huge mood swings and rages, defiant behavior and manipulative behavior. They may seem like they're kinder to strangers than they are to their own family, because it's that survival again, trying to make sure that anyone is there for them, but also pushing people away because they're afraid of getting too close if there's been any type of abuse. So those children will sometimes try to provoke power struggles, and they can have inappropriate social behaviors. It's not stuck forever in that child, but it takes more work, more loving care, more personal building of that relationship and trust to help that child to develop those types of things in their brain. So things that you need to do with a child who maybe is struggling like that, maybe had multiple foster homes could do the same type of thing, or a foster home where maybe there isn't as much of a loving setting. So with these kids, slow, gradual transitions help, giving them extra time to adjust. They're hypervigilant. So if they're hypervigilant, they're watching for danger. They're watching to see when things are going to go wrong. So just let them take time to settle and feel safe. Make the environment calm for them. Respond to them with warmth and reassurance. Don't take it personally. That's a really big piece. And don't give up on them. Always, always say to yourself, this isn't about me. This is about this person's needs. And I just need to really help reassure them. Encourage them to talk about and label feelings. So if they grew up as a very young child not being taught about feelings, they won't have the language to talk about their feelings and they'll act it out. So we want to help with that as well. And specialists can help with that too. Speech therapists maybe can help with that. Other types of therapists can as well. With those children, you may have some role modeling can be helpful, talking about what happened and what they might do differently the next time, practicing solutions, imagining, if this happens again, what can we do? Let's practice that. And then teaching them stress reduction techniques like mindfulness and breathing techniques to help give them those tools. PTSD is different than what I was just talking about. It's just the PTSD, there's some trauma that is significant, that it gets imprinted in the primitive part of the brain, and it can come back to them with triggers or certain things they might see, smell, taste, touch later that bring them back to that. It's not just a bad memory. Instead, it's like their emotions are right back at when it happened. You see it a lot with veterans. An example, my dad was a combat veteran in both World War II and Korea. They were trapped in Korea, lost many people, and he was the combat medic. As he got older, he said that, he said, "Oh, I don't remember your name," he told me, "but that's because I'm going every weekend I'm in the war," and he would tell me all about what happened. But even his dreams were infiltrated. And it's interesting that he forgot his family or his children during that time period, but he vividly remembered war. And that's because of PTSD, which he would not have admitted when he was younger because they were taught that was a stigma. But it's real and it happens to all of us when we go through intense trauma. So, children that have been through intense trauma, they could become fearful of a similar place, person, or event that might trigger it. They might be a child that when you reach out to just pat them gently and reassure them, they might jump or push away. They may express physical symptoms. Sometimes when children can't express their emotions, they'll they'll feel it in their body. And it's not just that they're making it up, or when we think of psychosomatic, it's not that they're making up that they have these symptoms. They're very real because our body is connected. Our brain is physical, our nervous system is physical. And when we go through trauma, it connects to both through our parasympathetic nervous system to our stomach and our heart. So we really do feel these things when we go through stress, that especially the type of stress that's triggered by trauma. Kids who have been through a lot of ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences, may have a lot of issues with this type of trauma or PTSD. Trauma. So always keep on the trauma lens. That way we won't judge kids or think of kids as being impossible to fix. Think of it more as what happened to make them feel this way, because we need to get to the bottom of that to help reassure them. It impacts their ability to trust people, their sense of personal safety. If you don't feel safe, you can't learn because you're always on edge. If you feel safe and comfortable in your educational setting, in your home, then your brain is ready to learn. It affects their ability to manage emotions. And it's that whole fight or flight. They become terrified when this is triggered. Ability to navigate and adjust to life's changes. So because the things they've been through put them that close to becoming dysregulated, it's harder for them than somebody who has a stable upbringing to be able to accept changes. They'll have more physical and emotional responses to stress. And if you study the ACE studies through the CDC, you'll see that they've done studies, and this is true, that the more adverse childhood experiences, it can cause people to also die younger because of heart problems and other physical problems that have been brought on because of it. I really think that the blue box here is incredibly significant and important. So take a look at the blue box. At Stanford University School of Medicine, they did a study and found that children who experienced trauma were 30 times more likely to have behavior and learning problems than those who are not exposed to trauma. So if you think of special education labels and all of that, behind it, you could still have this trauma that's causing it to make it hard to learn. Because when you have a lot of cortisol going through your brain because of trauma, it's hard to focus and it's hard to learn. So this is what is a real definite connection. And that's why having a holistic approach to children and thinking about social emotional needs as well as learning skills and knowledge can help heal that and help them learn. Trauma can be a number of things. I told you about my dad being in the war, and that's one we think of a lot for PTSD. But there are many things that can traumatize. Young people have been through sexual or physical abuse, very traumatizing. Children living with a parent who is struggling with alcoholism and drug use, where it's an actual addiction, that can be difficult and cause problems for the child. Homelessness. Many children live with homelessness and hunger. and that too. If our Maslow's basic needs, if you think about food and shelter, clothing, if those aren't met, how do we learn? It's important that those basic needs are met first. Kids who witness violence can have a harder time learning. Being separated from their parents, whether it's like a child who's in the system and is always going from foster home to foster home, or even a little child who gets lost in the mall. They have no clue where their parents are. That can be traumatic. It can be a momentary trauma that can impact them later as well and make them more clingy. Being bullied, isolated, or restrained, whether it's bullied by students at school or even as educators. Sometimes our methods we use can be outdated and can actually hurt a child and re-traumatize. So being isolated and restrained can cause re-traumatization for kids who have had that problem in the past. We want to think about the safety of people around them, but we also want to think about getting them in a safe spot where they can be, an adult can be present, be a regulation partner with them, and just help build those skills of calming themselves. If they've lost a family member or friend, sometimes we forget that children grieve. And so if we lose a parent or a grandparent, we forget that that child has a relationship too. And so sometimes they aren't helped through that loss. Automobile accidents, dog bites, kids who have gone through a lot of medical and painful dental procedures. That's a physical trauma that can impact us emotionally. And it kind of goes on and on. But just keep in mind that those types of traumas can impact a child. Things that are not traumatic to an adult, because we know what's going on and we can think it through, can still be impacting a child. So here's what happens. The prefrontal cortex, if you see it on that picture, is where we process higher thinking. It's where we are able to make good judgment, to be able to solve problems. That's our prefrontal cortex. If we are under stress and trauma, that prefrontal cortex shuts down. And in children, it isn't as fully developed to start with. All the way to about age 25, they say now, the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed just naturally, normally. So it is harder for young people to make those kinds of judgment decisions. That's why it's important adults support their learning and help them to make these decisions and guide that. But when they become terrified, the amygdala, which is that primitive part of the brain, detects that there's something dangerous, something scary going on. The hypothalamus wakes up the pituitary gland and hormones are released. The hormone that you feel when you get terrified, it's cortisol, and it travels through the blood and body to react to stress, and it triggers a response. The response it can trigger is fight, flight, or freeze. There's a new one that says fawn is also to be added to that, and that means that a child who will become extra people-pleasing because they're trying to be safer that way. But emotional memories are stored in the hippocampus. And when there is trauma or a trauma trigger, it can bring it all back because of those memories. It could be a smell. You know, if a child's been sexually abused and a smell of somebody's shampoo or perfume could wake something up and scare them. But just to keep that in mind, if you back a kid in a corner, if you restrain them, that fight response will kick in, but they have nowhere to go, and it can cause them to have a big emotional breakdown. Flight, some kids will run, they'll take off, they'll just leave the school. That's that kicking in again. Freeze response, you might not even know what's going on because that could be the quiet little person who's been through trauma and is sitting in the classroom and is not learning very much, but they could be so hyper vigilant that they aren't able to focus on what the teacher's saying because their mind is full of remembering this trauma. Anxiety is the most common disorder, and there are different types of anxiety. So anxiety also can be fueled by that cortisol. It's that hormone that causes anxiety reactions. With little ones, separation anxiety can be common. Phobias. Phobia means that there's something specific that triggers it. For somebody, it might be snakes. For somebody, it might be spiders. Whatever it is, it's very specific. Panic disorder. Panic disorder can cause panic attacks, but what panic disorder is that full flight or fight kicks in. The breathing becomes shallow and people can hyperventilate. It can feel like they're having a heart attack. If a child has panic disorder, take it seriously. Really help to calm them because to them it's very real and very scary for them. You can also teach them that panic will peak and come back down. And so that they can learn that it's not going to go on forever and learn some tools to calm themselves. Social anxiety disorders when people have a hard time being out in public with other people. Selective mutism. So a child who has selective mutism won't talk at school, but they may be a chattery kid at home. So their anxiety just causes them to freeze in terms of their ability to communicate. Generalized anxiety is a kid who feels pretty anxious all the time, and that could be like that hypervigilance. These are things that happen with anxiety. Affect dysregulation. So if you hear the word affect, that's mood. The moods will become dysregulated when somebody's anxious. And it might seem too extreme for the situation to somebody else who's observing, but it has to do with trauma and anxiety. Talked about hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is when kids never quite can relax, or adults. And it shuts down the prefrontal area, which helps us learn and causes us to be in that flight or flight state. Fearfulness, nervousness, chronic stress. So if a person's anxious all the time, it can cause their blood pressure to go up and other physical problems. Hyperarousal means that they're just always on edge. The cortisol levels go up. An interesting thing with this is even in pregnancy, if a mother is struggling with anxiety and trauma, it can cause their cortisol levels to go up, which can cause the baby's cortisol levels to start functioning at a high level. And that ends up being a level that they're used to even after they're born, because that's what the mother shares all of that with the baby. And so that's something to keep in mind too. I know one parent that I talked to had been in a refugee camp when she was pregnant with one child and said, that's of all my children, that's the one that has ADHD and has the most anxiety. She said, but that time when she was pregnant and living in a refugee camp was very difficult. And so her anxiety levels were high. So it kind of shows an example of what it's like. If you're really anxious when you're pregnant, it can impact the baby. We're teaching a class now, which is called the 40-Day Project, and it's all about supporting each other and getting people help through the time that they're pregnant, but also the 40 days postpartum, because that's a time when those cortisol levels can go up and people can experience postpartum depression, severe anxiety, and we can help support people to help them to feel calm and safe. And that's good for the mother and the baby. I talked about fight, flight, or freeze, impaired cognitive functioning. If you've ever had test anxiety and you forgot everything when you sat down to take that test, that's an example. So you could have a very bright person who does poorly in school because they have test anxiety. The brain floods with cortisol, and when the brain floods with cortisol, there's short-term memory loss. It's kind of like if I was going to introduce somebody that I know really well and I forget their name. I think that happens to everybody at some time. That's when you get a little nervous and the cortisol causes short-term memory loss. Excessive worrying. So some kids can't turn off the worrying, and it gives a negative lens and takes away some of their happiness. So that's something that it's good to be aware of and help them work on getting centered, getting present in the moment, and learning about the beauty of the world around them. And isolation and loneliness can be a part of anxiety disorder because they tend to be so guarded and have a hard time making those deeper relationships. Kids who go to school with untreated anxiety are more at risk to perform poorly in school. This is true too of kids who do well in their high school. Maybe they're from a rural high school. I know this is a rural supporting group here. And they do well. Maybe they get straight A's in their senior year, go off to college and end up dropping out. Some of that can be because of untreated anxiety disorder. And they might have felt very comfortable at school, at home, but when they get off in this new environment, it could trigger that anxiety. Another thing that can happen is they can start using substances like alcohol to try to feel less anxiety, and then that can interfere too with their schooling. So that's an important thing, is to teach kids about anxiety. If they struggle with it, let them know that it's okay to get help. And just we need to get rid of the stigma about talking about these things, because it can really impact their lives. Anxiety is the most common mental illness in the United States. The World Health Organization reported that during and after the pandemic, anxiety rates escalated 25% in all people. So all of us had some trauma from the pandemic. It was something we try to put up with, try to cope, but it's still, there's that subconscious trauma. Children, as teachers have noticed and parents have noticed, that children were really struggling both during and post-pandemic. So it was a big impact on people. 20% more children, youth, and adults reported symptoms of anxiety. Also, the treatment centers, the hospitals, the therapists, they got backed up way out months with new beds or new hours that they could meet with people, because it was so overloaded due to this increase. So it's really important that we try to get people help, and that we try to also, if you're a person who believes in talking to the to the lawmakers, to get more funding for this, because we want to get kids healed so that they can flourish. If you do have students or your own child who's doing homework, these are things that you can even put in IEPs to help make accommodations so that they can have success and have less anxiety. So being allowed to redo assignments and retake tests is important. To not have to even average. So if you have test anxiety and you flunk one test, a teacher who can toss that out and say, I'm going to let you take it over in this nice quiet place, and you're going to do fine, and you take all the time you need, and then the student may do well. Don't average the two tests. Just let them have the test of the one where they weren't struggling with their anxiety. Less workload is good. They'll become more anxious the more the work piles up. That works with depression too. If they're struggling from depression, the more the assignments pile up, it can cause them to feel hopeless. Having adults who do daily check-ins and encouraging regular attendance helps. Posting schedules, outlines, routines. Trying to use less competition. So some people thrive on competition. I know our rural areas, competition is a big thing, especially in sports. But for some kids, that's hard because they're struggling with anxiety. So know that it's okay if we have different techniques that we use with different kids. And with these kids with anxiety, to let them have some options that are less competitive. Cooperative learning, peer mentoring, having an older teen mentor a younger child that's struggling, using non-judgmental terms for feedback. So just really giving them hope, letting them know they're doing better, trying to cut back their assignments till it's small enough so that they can feel success, and then praising them, and then slowly adding more problems as they can manage it. If somebody's struggling with severe anxiety disorder, don't force them to socialize. That'll just make it worse for them. But do use subtle coaching in basic skills. Maybe even give them some pointers on things that might help them to get through, a social event. Model friendly, outgoing behavior towards them. If they do have exaggerated social fears, just gently talk about it. We don't want to make them feel bad about their own feelings, but we want them to help try to use that prefrontal area a little more and think about the actual threat, or if it's more imagined. And then again, if they have a panic attack, know that at that moment, their brain is shutting down and going into that primitive brain, and it can be scary for them. Teach them to accept rather than fight their panic. So just say, this happens to me. It happens to other people too. Let's just take our time. I'm going to breathe slowly, and I want you to try to model or copy my breathing. And then you can count with them and get them to slow that down. One thing is good is they can think of 5 things that they see, 5 things that they can touch, just to try to get them in the moment instead of their mind feeling like it's flying out into the world where there seems to be danger for them. Show them their feelings will peak. So one thing you can say is, it's like surfboard. You can go up a wave, but you'll come back down. And so if they think of that, they won't be as frightened as thinking it'll just make it worse and worse till they feel like they're going insane. Let them know that these feelings get better, they will subside. And try to, distract them from their fears by getting busy with something else. I'm going to play a video of a school that had kids who had a lot of trauma and the wonderful way that they handled that. So let me just see here. I have a number of videos, so I just want to pull up the right one. This is in an inner city, so it's not rural, but it can happen anywhere. But just to look at how this principal helped all his students to feel more calm. Can you see it? Yes?
Yes, the video is coming through.
Good. I always want to make sure.
I became principal of Visitation Valley Middle School in the fall of 1999. My first day here, I heard noise outside. I looked out my window, and there were 2 students tearing the gate off the hinges to get into the yard to play basketball. When I got out to the yard, I noticed there were some young students playing cops and robbers. I walked up to the young man and I said, "Hey, can I look at that for a minute?" And he said, "Sure." And he handed me his father's 45. In the 2002-2003 school year, we had 41 murders occur in this neighborhood. And the students at this school either were related to the persons who did the shooting, who were shot, or were present when the shooting took place. So there was a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety and fear for the students.
Stress levels were so high that everyone was really functioning at a disadvantage as a result of the environment, and it was impacting their psychological well-being. And many of the students actually have not only ADHD, but PTSD.
They'll take a ride down any any barrio or ghetto in America, and you hear the boom boxes, you hear the shouting, and unfortunately, too many of our kids even hear gunfire.
I think that many urban schools today are run like jails because the kids are out of control. And that's because of the environment they live in. We're not running a jail here. We're running a school.
The research is showing that stress is a major problem in our educational system. We can't have an effective educational system if we don't address the problem of stress. This impacts our neurophysiological functioning.
In order for kids to learn and be creative, they have to feel happy and safe. So I needed to start working on the social emotional end of things. And I heard about quiet time. And we took a brave step forward into a new world of teaching our students how to meditate.
Head up, eyes closed, quiet time starts now.
Quiet time is the first activity of the day when the students arrive, and it's also the last activity of the day before they're dismissed. The teacher rings a bell, and that starts the quiet time session. There's a 12-minute time period from when the teacher rings the first bell until the teacher rings the second bell. It's really completely silent in the room. Students are meditating. People here meditated, raise your hand.
I'm Jocelyn. I am an 8th grader at Visitation Valley Middle School. I live on Sunnydale. There was a day where there were people walking, and then my dad heard gunshots. Like, I felt like I couldn't move. The meditation helped me. It was like a force that blocked what I just experienced.
You're giving the kids a coping mechanism. The problems that you have keep coming, except your ability to deal with them changes. Behaviorally, you see a difference, especially I definitely saw a correlation between their behavior and being more manageable in class after they started meditating.
If we continue to do what we've always done, we're always going to get what we always got. Is that good enough? I don't think it's good enough for the 21st century. We need to be the outliers to try things that have never been tried and see if they work. In education, our job is to touch the future.
I'm trying to move my little bars around so I can see my list. There we go. All right. This was just one example of tool that can help. And I know that what you were looking at was an urban school, but I know from my own teaching experience up in northern Minnesota that there can be a lot of trauma and other things going on in students' lives in rural areas as well. And sometimes when kids are thinking about tough things that maybe are happening at home, it's hard to get present in the school because their mind is full of trauma or just anger and other emotions that they're bringing with them from their own daily lives. So the nice thing about meditation, it's you can think of it as mindfulness. Tell people if they question you, it's not a religious practice. So if some people think that that's not appropriate, let them know that this is just a way that this is called getting present. We just want to feel our kids to feel safe and welcomed, and like school's a sanctuary, a place where we're going to care about them, we're going to respect them, and we are going to help them learn tools to calm themselves. So it's a very, very wonderful thing. You can do guided narratives, and you can find a lot of guided narratives online. I was working with a group of 13-year-olds, and they were great. I was talking to them about mental health, and then I did a guided narrative where I led them through, and it had music in the background on my computer and a beautiful picture of a beach and palm trees. But I just led them through a story about themselves being there that was very relaxing. And they had put their heads down, and this entire big group of 13-year-olds became silent. And afterwards, it was sweet because it was time for them to go. And as they walked past me to go to the door to their next class, I heard them saying things like, wow, I could really hear the waves. I could smell the breeze. I could feel it. But it helps them to get their minds off their worries. And it also helps them to relax. So it's a wonderful tool. And people who think of ways to help students get from a dysregulated state into a regulated state, think about ways to reframe it so that it's good for their mental health. Instead of saying, you're going to have a timeout as a punishment or you're going to be expelled, think of ways to build a time in where they can really relax. I've heard of a teacher who put like a paper palm tree and put out books that were travel booklets about going on vacation, and had some quiet music back in that corner. And that was supposedly her time out, but she didn't frame it that way. She said that's their vacation area. If they're having a tough time, that everybody needs a little break sometimes when they're having a hard time and they feel stressed out. So that's their vacation area, and they could ask her if they needed it. And she said, also, I can tell you sometimes that maybe you need a vacation. And then she role played it. She said, I often need one when I'm really crabby. And she role played that just to show them how to use it. There are a number of different ways of doing that to reframe it into a learning tool so that they can really learn how to calm themselves. All right. I'm not going to show that one because of our time limits, but just to let you know that this one is about yoga, a yoga calm type that they bring into the schools, and they actually lead them through different yoga, from kind of a build-up to something that's real active and then calming again. They found it to be very effective. In one school in the Twin Cities, it was a level 4 special education intermediate district. And the person who was the in charge of social emotional learning, the administrator, brought in yoga calm. And she thought, well, some of these kids are having a pretty tough time, but I'm going to try it. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. And it was actually some of the kids that had the toughest time in high school that really loved it and gave her feedback about how they used it at home too, just to kind of block out their sibling that they were angry with and just get in their room and just calm themselves. So it's life tools that any of us could use And one of the things it does too is it brings everybody in the classroom into the same space. Because when kids come into a classroom, their minds are in all different places, especially if they've got any trauma going on in their life. So this helps to bring them into this safe place. Whoops. I don't know why that popped up. I just have to shut a window. There we go. All right. Did I pop twice? That's what I'm wondering. Okay, I need to go back to, there we go. There. All right. I'm going to talk next about autism, first of all. Autism is a neurological condition, and oftentimes people saw it as framed it negatively. And what people with autism currently are trying to help train the world or educate the world that this is a neurodiversity. So some people maybe are more neurotypical, and some people have a neurodiverse way of looking at the world. Sometimes people with different neurodiversities may need some accommodations, modifications, but it's the way their brain is built, the way it functions. So we don't want to think of it in a negative way, but we do want inclusivity, equity, inclusion. So we want to make sure that if any one of us needs some kind of accommodation or modification, that we look at it and help to bring that so that we can have people from the same starting place, not somebody always struggling to keep up with others. But if you look at the pictures that I'm sharing, very famous people are on the autism spectrum. Anthony Hopkins, Greta Thunberg, Daryl Hannah. You probably recognize more Hermione from Harry Potter. So, and Justin Bieber's there. Many more people than this are on the autism spectrum. In the past, high-functioning autism was often not referred to as autism at all, but more as genius. So just keep in mind that autism isn't just one thing, and people can have different things that might challenge them, but then they also can have a lot of gifts. And so we want to embrace differences among all of us and foster an environment that celebrates those differences and provides support if needed for any type of difference that might get in the way of flourishing. So there are other words that some people now talk about with neurodivergency. The reason they include these, I think is most often used with autism, but the reason they include these others is because it's about neurological concerns, not the environment. It's not caused by the environment. So kids with ADHD, their brain works a certain way. It's a neurological. OCD, these are all brain-based disorders. And some of them, can get more serious or even vary in the way it looks between people. Dyslexia. There are people who have done beautifully with dyslexia, but we have to recognize it's not about their developmental disability so much as about providing accommodations and that can help them to flourish, because it's more about what they're seeing and the way their brain's interpreting letters and the written word. Down syndrome. So we need to reframe that and not think of it as so much a developmental disability as a person who has an extra chromosome. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and a little bit about how my cousin's done a beautiful job of helping her daughter and the people around her daughter to celebrate her daughter's differences and then to get her the accommodations she needs. So you can read those on your own, but here are some of the unique gifts that someone might have, even though they might have an autism diagnosis. So extraordinary memory. If you've ever known somebody that was on the spectrum, they may have had an area that they focused on very much in this narrow focus, but they could tell you everything about a certain topic because it was something that they really focused on. Some people can become brilliant. I think it was Glenn Gould, the composer and pianist, where now he would be labeled as having autism. He wouldn't sit down to play unless he had the chair that his dad made for him when he was a child to use at his piano. And he would count out loud, but he was absolutely brilliant pianist and composer. So we all have some things we struggle at, but we all have this potential for different gifts that can flourish. Creativity, the arts. Many artistic people struggled with some challenges that maybe because of their own neurodiversity. Some can be extra friendly. And when I think of a little one with Down syndrome, they're often very friendly and kind to others, willing to try new things, visual strength, special interests, problem solving, music. You know, a lot of musicians. What I've read recently is that even that intense focus causes them to just get better and better because they're practicing all the time as well, which is different than sometimes neurotypical people who struggle to find time to practice. So we just want to celebrate differences and know that our brains, each one of us, you know, our brains has differences from the next person. But with the neurodivergent umbrella, it's where there may be an actual need for some accommodations, modifications, but also look for those gifts and celebrate the gifts. Here's my cousin's little girl. She's older now, but I loved this and asked Tracy if I could use this in presentations because her mom is a teacher, but she created this vision board to take with to any kind of IEP meeting or conferences, or even, you know, going to a doctor, maybe even to a babysitter. But I liked her idea that every one of us could make something like this about ourselves. If I was a special education teacher, I might have each student make one and then go to conferences and talk about this. So what's most important, our weaknesses or our strengths? Well, our strengths, of course. And sometimes kids that struggle with mental health disorders or neurodivergency get told about what doesn't work. But what does work? So little bitty Avale, even though she was just 3 years old and she was born with her extra chromosome or Down syndrome, she loves books. She knows sign language. So people might think, oh, she doesn't understand. She can't speak. Oh, yeah, she knows her sign language. She's social, kind, funny, smart, happy. She loves to dance. She loves her friends and her siblings. She loves to learn. She knows tunes and actions to songs and nursery rhymes. And I've seen that on the videos her mom sometimes posts. What doesn't work? And I think her box of what doesn't work could be true about all of us. She doesn't want to be rushed. She doesn't like negative talk or yelling. Don't assume she doesn't understand. You'll notice at the bottom it says sign language. That's because Tracy attached an extra sheet with all the signs that she knew so that whoever was working with her could use those signs. What does she really love? Her parents, her siblings, her grandparents, her dog, her dollies, Elmo, reading books and music. So that was at that time. But I also really love this because I think this is something that could be true for any child, but especially true to remind people who are working with a child who struggles with some needs. So they said, we envision our daughter living a life of choice. We envision her having relationships she feels are valuable. In her future, we envision her doing work she enjoys, and that'll make her feel productive. We envision our daughter living a happy, meaningful life surrounded by love and support. What works? Praise, inclusion, believing in her and her abilities, positive reinforcement. If there are transitions, to have that warning time, that cushion of time to get ready. Model expectations. Don't assume she knows what you're saying, but model it. Hand over hand, doing it with her, and gentle reminders. And then at that time, those were some of the skills she was working with at 3 years old. And so I love this, and I think it would be good for all kids, but especially for kids where maybe people don't appreciate all their strengths. What are some of the things that cause people to get the label? And again, autism is a spectrum, and there can be very high functioning autism. There can be kids who struggle with learning that on the more opposite end. But some of the things that you might notice, and they aren't true for every person who gets the autism label, so to speak, but delayed language. So actually, now that they're including Asperger's as part of the autism spectrum in the DSM-5, there are many people with which would have been called Asperger's who actually didn't have delayed language, but may have some of the other symptoms. But if there is a child who has a delayed language or a loss of previously acquired language and then pardon? Excuse me. Oh, somebody must just accidentally. Struggling a little more with eye contact, really liking solitude. They might struggle with social skills and empathy, but it's not because they're a person who doesn't want to be nice. It's just that some of that part of the brain that makes it more natural isn't working the same way as a neurotypical person. But you can teach those social skills. And if you talk about why they shouldn't have done something, they can actually learn, because it isn't that they don't care about people. They just have some struggles with that social skills. So they might need more role playing and practice with people about that. Persistent repetition of words or phrases. Again, not all people with autism have that, but that can be a sign. Resistance to change in routine or surroundings. That's something that teachers can build into their schedule, gentle ways and reminders that we're going to do something new, but do it ahead of time and give them enough time to get ready. They may have restricted interests. Use those restricted interests to celebrate their strengths. So let them talk to the class about what they're interested in. And the class, teaching the other kids in the class to respect each other, and they'll often be quite interested in the fascination and fascinated with what this person's sharing with them. Sometimes you'll see flapping, rocking, spinning. Those repetitious behaviors are self-stimulating or self-soothing for that person. But if you see that kind of thing with younger children, that might be a sign. And then sensory integration concerns can be a problem. So some maybe, and it can be different for each person who's on the spectrum, but some really hate loud sounds, maybe smells, tastes, textures, lights, colors. So learning about that person, and I think that thing that they made for Avalate could also be done for a person who has sensory issues, so that people know and accommodate. And here it says, people often thought of it as one extreme or the other extreme. Either you had it or didn't. But instead, it's more like on the wheel, they show different things. And how they did this graph for one person. And that person was stronger in one area than another area. But you can just see some of the things there. Executive function, interest, perception, etc. But many of our geniuses, people like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, would fit on the autism spectrum. Albert Einstein. So don't think of it as, oh, this child's fits in a box and is going to end up only getting this far in life, because quite to the contrary, they can definitely have their own strengths that they really excel in. A sensory room is nice, even a child's room at home, creating a structured, calming environment. You could even have your children that are helping you, or that need these things, to have them suggest some things they might want in that room. Calming images, plants, soothing sounds, the lighting, keeping the lighting down to a less distracting. One thing that can be really irritating are the lights that buzz, but making sure there aren't things like that. That feeling of weighted blankets, weighted vests, or like if you see up in the very corner, whoops, there was like a swing that kind of hugs the person. That can be very comforting to people that have these sensory issues. So just a number of things that a person can use. I know one of my grandsons struggles with sensory issues. He hates loud sounds and he has a hard time falling asleep. And even the type of stuffed animal that you can warm up in a microwave, not too hot, but just enough so that it's something warm and soothing that can help them, soothe them, that type of thing. And again, enjoy their interests. Occupational therapists can help, especially narrowing down those things that each child has individual differences and trying to find out what we need to modify or to focus on for learning. And then socially acceptable behavior, just really working with them on that. A friend who had a high school student who was going through puberty found that he was very direct in the questions he would ask her about dating and about, and oftentimes it took her by surprise, because he really wanted to date, but he didn't have an understanding of what to do about that or how it should look. And so just being very open and honest and answering their questions in a way that's direct without shame, but just helping them to understand. Okay, obsessive compulsive disorder. Obsessive compulsive disorder is an anxiety-based disorder. And so the more anxious somebody becomes, the more persistent, and often you may see those types of behaviors. So it could be touching things repeatedly in a certain order. It could be, there can be things that aren't even visible because they're saying it in their head. It'll seem senseless to the people around them, but to them it's soothing. If you've ever seen the show about Monk, the detective, it shows an example. Brilliant man, went through stress when his wife died, and he had OCD to start with, but those behaviors picked up and got worse when he went through that trauma. So things to keep in mind is that it is something that you can kind of watch for. If you start to notice some of these things, you can help them to find ways to make it better for them, but also to get their mind off of their worries and to get them back in the present. Obsessive compulsive disorder and Tourette syndrome co-occur, and it can go all the way up to 90%. And one of the things that I read in research was that sometimes people who have Tourette syndrome diagnosis when they're younger, it will become obsessive compulsive diagnosis later. So it can even present itself different developmentally. So with Tourette's, it's less controlled. If you think of Mr. Monk, he knew exactly what he was doing when he touched every lamppost or had to arrange things very specifically. He was aware that he had this urge. But with Tourette's, it can be more like eye blinking, nose clearing, throat clearing, twitching, and it can be irritability. That could be part of it. Know that both of these disorders are neurologically based. They can't help it. And the more attention we give to it, it'll actually make it worse. So we want to keep it calm. You can teach somebody about their disorder and they might understand it better, but also just to help other people around them maybe understand if they don't. If what they're doing is obvious to everybody else, you can gently teach kids about all of us have special gifts, and we all have things that may challenge us sometimes. And this is why this is happening. And there have been children that have talked about their own Tourette's syndrome to a class. Not that you would want to force that on anybody, but sometimes you can get so that the parents and the child become comfortable with talking about it as well. So interventions with either Tourette's or OCD. Accommodate behaviors they have no control over. Don't point it out, it just makes it worse. Redirect them. So that iPad, computers can be a good way to redirect because the brain then just goes right straight to the task at hand. Diplomacy, talking to peers about mental health differences and about the specific one that you're talking about. Use technology, I just mentioned that. That's a good way to get them to start dropping some of the repetitions and things because their mind is focused on something else. And give them an option. And this is true with any child who's struggling with behaviors or mental health concerns, to be able to take some private, quiet time if helpful, especially since these are anxiety-based neurological disorders, which get worse when they feel stressed. They may need a separate testing location that's not as distracting. Doctors, therapists can help them with some behavioral modification strategies, and medication can greatly reduce it. So even some people may be against medication, just know that there are medications that have proven effective with some of these childhood disorders. You could see, this is a SPECT scan that shows how active the brain is in a child with ADHD. So they can't help it. It's a neurological condition. And so if this child is running all over the place, if they're hyperactive and have difficulty that is related to their ADHD, know that it's not their fault. And that some people might think it's terrible when people are given stimulant medication and might think that leads to other drug use. But the thing that to keep in mind is if it's true ADHD, the stimulant medication will calm it. Doctors have to be careful not to overdiagnose ADHD. So some people get diagnosed with ADHD when maybe it's all trauma-based. In that case, stimulant medication would not be a good thing. So there are some experts, the Twin Cities, Dr. Gary Johnson is a doctor that I can tell you more about if you have any questions, but he does SPECT scans and very thorough examinations to figure out, is this true ADHD or is it something else going on? And if it's true ADHD, when they do that thorough exam, they can see the brain activity is very active in this person. He himself had two sons that their teachers both thought they had ADHD. It ended up that one wasn't listening to the teacher because he was deaf in one ear. And the SPECT scan actually showed it. No ADHD pattern, but nothing much going on in that ear. This is kindergarten kids. The other one, it was a classic ADHD pattern. So it is a brain function. And there was a Dr. Ned Hallowell, I believe, out of the East Coast, who talks about it's like having a Cadillac brain with a Model T brake. So, there's a lot of gifts, but hard to stop them when they start getting wound up. Lots of things you can do to help them, but it takes a lot of patience and a lot of distracting them and giving them enough to do so that they aren't interfering with other people's learning. Shorter attention spans. These are kids who have trouble staying on task, waiting turns, waiting in line. They have trouble screening out a lot of stimulus in the environment. So a quiet place to take a test is one thing. Parents, a quiet place to do their homework is important, because if you're doing it in the kitchen table, and I can tell you this from one of my sons who has ADHD, every time somebody walks in, their head pops up and they lose their place because it's hard for them to screen out other stimulus. They may blurt out answers. It's actually can be reinforcing to them blurting out more answers if there's attention given to every time they blurt out the answer. So the best thing to do is just kind of ignore the blurting out and say something like, I will call on you when you raise your hand, and just keep it, non-judgmental, but just a reminder. And you could have non-verbal reminders for some of these kids and talk about it with them, that I will put my hand on your shoulder if I feel like you're blurting out too much, or just things that they work out between that and with the child. If they need to sub-vocalize, it might actually help them stay on track, kind of like Glenn Gould with his pianist and counting out loud. You could hear him. With this children that need this, let them do it, because that's the point. We want them to learn in reading class, and they may need some quiet space to do it. Have them do errands for you. Praise them a lot for doing errands for you. If you're giving them handouts, make sure they're not too packed with information. Lots of white space. I used to use graph paper with big boxes for math, because otherwise their problems would get so all over the place that they forget where they were, or it was impossible to add up the numbers because they weren't in a line. But just those types of things can help. Copies of notes. Have them take notes. When I taught 5th grade, I had them take notes. But you could still have one person make a copy for the whole class and print that out and say, if anybody would like an extra copy of the notes, here we go. Because sometimes the kids with the ADHD, their note taking may not be the best to take home and study, but still doing it is a learning process. Give them extra time to complete their work, and some assignment checks. Parents and teachers can communicate and make sure that they're handing in the work they actually do, because that can be a problem. They can have a locker full of finished work that they never gave the teacher. Fidgets are really important. There was an adult that I taught a class like this to, and she came up and said, I hope you don't mind if I knit. She said, because I have ADHD. When I knit, I hear every word you say. When I have nothing to do with my hands, my mind is all over the place. So it literally helps the brain when you have something that you can do with your hands and then focus your brain on what you're hearing. I don't like the labels on this page, but I'm going to talk about them anyway because you might hear them. So I know Washburn Center for Children in Minneapolis said they're getting rid of these 2 terms. They don't diagnose people with them. They are still in the DSM-5, but I think they're negative, and I think they're caused by trauma usually. If you hear oppositional defiance disorder, they're talking about somebody who's having some resistant negativity towards adults. It's usually verbal. Many children at certain ages will naturally talk back or naturally say no and disagree. For example, 18 to 36-month-old children will often say, no, me do it, that kind of thing. Teenagers, it's part of developing. They're trying to be more independent. Don't take it personally. But some kids have this issue more than others, and so they end up with this label. Conduct disorder is a label that is often given to kids that literally are breaking the law, hurting others, hurting self, or hurting, their environment. And so then they end up with that disorder label. Again, I think a lot of it's related to trauma. So I really don't like those negative disorders or labels. But I'll tell you about it anyway. So when if you end up with a kid who's given that diagnosis, they may be argumentative, impatient, easily annoyed, negative thinking, thinks everybody's against them. They might bully others, blame others. What you need to do is reframe it and start praising them for the good things. So a thing you might say is, I've noticed that you love to argue. You'd be an excellent lawyer. And then maybe start a debate club, even in the classroom, debate things, have them debate the opposite of what they maybe believe as part of that practice. But just to start building their confidence so they don't, because their self-esteem can end up really poor and it just makes it worse. With some kids, you may need a more restrictive environment. But I'm not talking about punishing them by putting them in a room all by themselves, but it's just to be aware of, and then sometimes literally a different setting. So if a kid is labeled with conduct disorder, some of the things you might see: chronic truancy, frequent suspension, lying, stealing, lots of fights, destroying property, maybe aggression, violence, bullying, not really seeming to have a regard for other people's rights. I talked about reactive attachment disorder before. One of the people that I know that had talked about their child they had adopted, as they got older, they struggled with behaviors and they ended up having to call crisis quite a few times. They ended up having their child go to Northwoods in Duluth. But the important thing is they said, you're my forever child. Because you're going to another setting does not mean we don't love you. We love you. That's unnegotiable. We love you. And we'll come visit you and we're going to support you. What happened was the young man went to high school there and liked it. He would come home and do better than he had before, but he also was eager to get back. So that rigid setting and the predictability of it seemed to give him less behaviors that were conduct disorder behaviors. So again, settings are there for a reason. And so we want the least restrictive settings, but sometimes it is something that you want to seek out. Some kids end up in inpatient psychiatric, not because you're trying to punish them, but because at the point they're at, that's the least restrictive setting that they can grow and learn and get well in, and where they can be safe. And that's a big part, safety of self and others. So when a child is disruptive a lot, look beneath the behavior. It's not about the behavior. There's usually something driving the behavior, feelings underneath. Don't take it personally. I think sometimes new teachers will even drop out of teaching because they take things too personally. But just know that the child's going through something, trying to help figure it out, and not thinking you have to do it alone as a parent or an educator, but getting support from professionals, and getting may take some testing to find out what's going on with it can be a number of different things going on, whether it's, the fact that a student I had once maybe had difficulty with math, and as soon as he get in math class would throw his book. Well, let's test that person to see where they're at in math and give them the work that won't push their buttons, but will help them meet them where they're at. But there are a lot of different reasons. So it can be symptoms of trauma. I had a little girl show up once and was the first day of our standardized tests, which I didn't really like to give those anyway, but we had to. And she ripped it up, threw it across the room, and put her head down and started sobbing. Well, having been a teacher for a long time, I knew it had nothing to do with the test. I thought she had something happen to her that's causing her to not be able to focus on testing right now. And it was true. There had been a very traumatic incident and she had a lot on her mind. And at that moment, There was no way she could focus on a test. And so we provided her with counseling support at that time, helped her to talk through her needs, and worry about the test later or not. Yeah, think about the child first. I like to think of it as a kitten. So if you have a little kitten and they're frightened, they will arch their back, they'll scratch you, they'll hiss. Doesn't mean they're a big mean tiger that's going to kill somebody. It means they're afraid. And sometimes I think these little people, we forget that's exactly what they are as a child, and that they are trying to act tough to hide their vulnerabilities. So we just really need to build relationships with them and then get the extra help we need to help them with their needs. Develop a caring relationship with kids. Kids that are struggling with mental health concerns, they really like rituals. Things will throw them off if it's different. So try not to have surprises. If there's going to be something different the next day, like a substitute, if you're a parent and if it's going to be a babysitter, help them get used to that, and find out ways to help to soothe them through that. Music is always good. Yelling is bad. So the more we can use music or something to signal a transition, the more comforting. And then one thing that can work with older kids is having a complaint box or grievance forms. The one that worked in a level 4 special ed, which were kids that were in a setting that was more restrictive, and high school, she made a grievance form. And so there was a young man and he was swearing and angry at his teacher, but she had taught the teachers that this is the last stop for a lot of these kids. And expelling will not help. It'll just push them out on the street. So she taught them to signal her and let the young person, who could be a size of a grown-up, go down the hall. And this administrator would meet them partway and say, "You seem really angry. Would you like to fill out a grievance form?" And they were able to come in her room and write down why they were angry. And then later they would have a meeting between the educator and the student and talk about it. But the main thing is it gave them a tool that grown-ups can use, and they can learn about that, is that you could write down what's bothering you instead of taking it out and hurting somebody. And then that student would wait with her. Well, it wasn't a timeout. He was just waiting for a chance to talk with his teacher. So it was reframed. The more we can reframe and give them some control over their actions and how to problem solve, the better. How's our time? I like this video, so I'm going to show it to you. Let me just do it from the actual. Some of these ones that are in a city, actually, I think they work beautifully in rural as well. So if you're in an area where kids go through trauma, this type of teaching can work beautifully there too. I even came up with ideas that were similar, just as ways to make things work.
In this second grade classroom, a tussle over a book becomes a teachable moment.
Okay, we're having a problem here. Would you like the teacher to help you, or would you like to go to the Peace Corner? Peace Corner?
With older students teaching younger ones a lesson in conflict resolution.
Let's say if me and Gabriella had a problem, then we're gonna go inside the Peace Corner and express our feelings with a peace helper. And I think everybody knows what a peace helper is.
Learning to be a peace helper is just part of the unique curriculum at PS 24, a K-5 school in an underserved neighborhood in Brooklyn, which has been transformed by building a culture of social and emotional well-being.
I grew up in the neighborhood, and I know that the issues that, the children are dealing with are real issues. How can you learn when you're thinking about the problems you're having elsewhere? How can you learn when you're feeling horrible about yourself? How can you learn when you think you don't have any friends or no one cares for you? I mean, we have to address all these issues before they can even care about anything else. These are like basic needs. So I want you to stand up if you ever said something that wasn't nice to someone that hurt their feelings.
Our school was called a failing school, according to No Child Left Behind. What we decided was that the way to address it is not to kill the children by drilling them on very flat kind of learning, skill and drill, but to really look at the whole child and give them what you would find in, say, a private school. And part of that is certainly social emotional learning.
Listen carefully. I want you to stand up if someone ever put you down. If someone said
social emotional learning happens everywhere at PS 24 throughout the day. The Reading, Writing, Respect, and Resolution curriculum features books with character-building lessons. Conflict mediators trained in the Resolving Conflict Creatively program help their peers resolve disputes on and off the playground.
Do you guys need help solving this problem?
Yeah.
Okay. What could you have done differently? Say sorry. You're saying that what could you have done differently? You could have said sorry to him? Okay.
What is going on with us today?
Once a week during lunch period, a small group of boys gathers to express their concerns in discussion and artwork.
In the club, you can just draw a picture or write about what happened during the problem. Is a lot more easier just to draw a picture of something that happened than having to
talk about.
Right, because sometimes people are very nervous. I don't like when people make fun of me, call me 4 eyes and stuff, because I wear glasses. I start getting mad and then I can't control myself. So now my friends are helping me more to not fight. They just told me to go calm down. I'll calm down, and sometimes I'll tell the teacher.
Okay, what would solve it for you, Julian?
Twice a week, Emma Gonzalez of the nonprofit Morningside Center for Teaching Social Responsibility comes to PS 24 to train teachers and students in conflict resolution.
I really wanted a leadership model. I really wanted kids teaching other kids. Kids listened to each other.
So you had a book first and a girl snatched it from you? Yeah. How do you feel? I feel mad.
Young people really begin to think critically about their own actions and begin to have a place where they can talk about feeling bad. If there was a fight at home, if there was a problem, if they didn't have enough to eat, where they could really, feel free in a safe environment to express what they were feeling.
So you need my help? Yeah. What happened?
And it's very easy to train kids to be helpers. It's very easy. Okay, so you want to ask, what were they doing? What did they watch?
I like doing it because I like helping other kids. And it's very fun for me because I get to have fun and then be serious at the same time. When the peace helpers were helping solve the conflict, what did you see the peace helpers do? When I do stuff like the mini lesson, I have to stay focused, and especially when I'm working like first graders or kindergartners. So anybody else want to try? I'm still learning because if I go to 6th grade next year, I need to learn how to control my anger because I have a serious temper problem.
I want you to think about what makes you really angry.
One period each week, Shirley Guerrero's 4th graders practice conflict resolution skills.
Okay, stop. Shamara punched him. So was she being strong, mean, or giving in? But I thought it was interesting that Shamara and Gabriela actually looked at their choices, but they chose to be mean. My class did a lot of this work last year, and by the end of the year, they were so confident. It was great. It was just amazing, the work they were producing, the way they presented themselves, the way they spoke to others. Does that happen in the real world? So let's turn and talk to your partner. What can happen because she chose to be mean?
For Principal Fuentes, PS 24's modest investment in the programs has paid big dividends.
It's actually not that expensive. It's a minimal investment of resources. It's really more the will to do it and the time to spend with the professional development and thinking about how this really just gets infused into what you're doing normally.
Okay, so we're going to put our arms around each other.
We have definitely moved. We were considered a failing school, and now we have made our adequate yearly progress.
Together we stand. Together we stand.
So I think that all those kinds of very objective measures are showing that what we're doing is working.
What you'll notice there is that they're teaching them how to talk about their feelings. They're teaching them how to get along with other people. There are different kids that will always struggle with some of these things, but if they're taught the skills to help them, then they'll grow developmentally and become more able to be able to learn and to be able to enjoy life and enjoy each other. Let's see, I'm trying to, oh, I know I have to move this. Sorry. Okay. The thing to keep in mind is no one's typical, and we're all different. And oftentimes we haven't been taught the skills, and we shouldn't assume kids have them. We shouldn't assume kids automatically know how to treat each other. And if they're struggling with a family where there maybe at the time is some discord between the parents or partners, the adults, that can impact the child. So we want school to be a safe place and have equity for all differences, and then also teach kids the skills they need. Some people might think, well, that'll take too much time. We got to teach them their science, their math. No, you can weave it in, especially in literature. You can have books about it. You can have them write about it. And I love the cross-age tutoring. And you'll notice the 6th grade girl, or the one that was in 5th and said she'd be in 6th, talked about her own anger problems, but look at how she flourished being a mentor and a person who taught about what she was actually learning about. And when you teach somebody else about the skill you're learning, it reinforces your own abilities. So things we need to keep in mind is to avoid power struggles. Adults don't ever win, so to speak, with a kid by starting butting heads. So we don't want to argue with kids. We don't need power struggles. There are absolutes in life. You know, if somebody's doing something really dangerous, it's an absolute. We have our rules, right? But we can repeat that like a broken record, and we can have a consequence. But let's not make it into a big power struggle that escalates. Adults that escalate students end up getting in trouble and end up not liking school and not liking their teacher. The more we can build relationships, the better. We want teachers that have rules, and kids do like consistency. They do like knowing what's expected of them, but let's do it in a very humane way, just that old golden rule. Treat them the way we'd want to be treated, and then teach them those skills, and don't assume they naturally know them. And know that kids who live in areas where maybe there's historical trauma or ongoing trauma are going to need more support, because trauma, again, gets in the way of learning. So whether they're in an area where there've been a lot of deaths from fentanyl, or like in that Oakland one where there are literally people being killed, those kids, they need healing and they need to feel they're safe. So that's something we adults can focus on. When people seclude and restrain kids, it just makes them feel more vulnerable and more shame. So that's why it's good to reframe it as, you know, do you want to use the vacation corner or the quiet space? Kind of work it out ahead of time when they're not in trouble. What would help soothe them if they had that feeling again? Being in front of their peers when they're having a meltdown isn't the most soothing thing. It makes them feel embarrassed. And sometimes when they can't save face, it'll actually escalate. So we want them to have some quiet space, but having an adult that can be present and not be judgmental, but just be reassuring, help them to calm down, and then help them and engage them in repairing any damage they might have done. That's a better way to do it than just locking them up in a room or holding them when they feel like they have that flight feeling. It can make them feel very panicky. And consequences don't teach. So sometimes it's because they've got an immature brain development. And so it's impossible to do what the adult's asking them to. This little picture is cute. And it reminded me of my boss's grandchild, my previous boss. She said he hated kindergarten, or preschool. And she said, well, why? Why do you hate it? And he said, they make me write my name. And she said, but don't they teach you to write your name? And he said, well, they try, but I cover my ears and close my eyes. So what he was actually sharing was that he was frustrated with his inability to make it look really good. His dad's an artist. He was an artistic little guy. And he felt he wasn't doing a very good job of writing his name because he was a perfectionist. But again, it's that feeling of not being able to do something that can trigger kids too. So we want to see and give them work that's at the right developmental stage for them as well. And know that when a child has a meltdown, it's not a tantrum to get attention. It's disruptive and frightening to that child and embarrassing if they're in front of their peers. So stay calm as an adult. Don't take it personally. Breathe slowly. And there are mirror neurons, like a mirror that we look into in our brain. And so when a child looks and hears and a child looks at a calm adult and hears them breathing slowly, they start to mirror and imitate it. If we scream and yell at them, they'll do the same thing in the opposite, and it'll escalate. So keep it calm, model calm. Even if you, as an adult, feel stressed, act as if, model calm. And it'll help you as well to get through that. Know that it's not willful misbehavior. Instead of asking, what do I need to do to motivate this kid? Look and think, what is getting in the way? What's happening to this child that we see these behaviors as symptoms that something's not right? And that's Dr. Ross Green. He has a book called The Explosive Child that's just fabulous, and really gives good advice on how to handle it. One of the things he talks about is collaborative problem solving. So with kids that struggle, we can teach them how to solve the problem, but engage them so they take ownership and understand what's going on, why it's not appropriate, and what they can do instead. And if you want to look at that, it's livesinthebalance.org is Ross Green's. And he has Plan B. He has sheets that you can print out if you want to work through it with a child. Just always keep trauma in mind, trauma informed. Because oftentimes it's that triggering of the amygdala when we feel there's danger, there's trauma. And a lot of the kids that seem the toughest, they're really scared inside and are just putting up a front. The more positive we are, the more we build relationships, that comes first. Then learning can take place. It's not our goal to punish. Our goal is to teach. And with kids with mental health disorders, learning disorders, we need to meet them where they're at with accommodations and modifications to help them learn. It's not our job to fail people. It's not our job to give F's and D's. It's our job to get every child to be able to learn. And so those are just some of the ideas I talked about. And you can have a copy of this. But tomorrow, it's almost that time, isn't it? Tomorrow, we'll be doing the suicide prevention piece. And then if you have questions, I'll make tomorrow a little shorter so we can ask questions about both days. But just keep these in mind. As an adult, it's about us. They're going to mirror us. They're learning from us. So be empathetic, be supportive, be encouraging. Don't take their behavior personally. Teach what you want them to do. Don't punish. They don't learn from punishment. Model respectful behaviors and respect the child and teach them that feelings are okay. We don't want to punish feelings. We want them to be able to talk about their feelings and not just act out on them. and make the classroom a belonging place where kids with all the neurodiversity and struggles as far as mental health concerns can feel safe and loved and cared for. So work on team building. You'll notice in that one in Brooklyn, those kids formed a circle and they were really bonded as a class. And those were kids probably don't have the easiest life. So just work on belonging and work on with my little cousin who had Down syndrome. The kindergarten at a church that she wanted her daughter to go to was saying, no, we can't handle her. And I said, Tracy, tell them that they need to do that. They need to be able to handle her. And they ended up loving her, and it was good for everybody. But we also need to be advocates and fight for these kids' rights. All right, so this is for tomorrow. And how's our time? Do we have time for questions? Oh, it's the end, isn't it?
We can, if people want to stay on and take a few, we do have a few questions. If people want to stay for those, we can repeat them in Q&A again tomorrow. Just a reminder, I put it in the chat. The link will be the same for tomorrow, and I will try to send a reminder out through Zoom to all registered participants. So please make sure that you check your email, but make sure that you saved the link that you had for today. It will be the same registration link and passcode. All right, the questions that we had, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording for now.
I'll stop the this.
And then the questions that we had that came through